hear me? I know my mask. I want to make sure I'm projecting. Everybody hear me? Okay. Got it? Try this again. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. This is a powerful event. Before I start, I want to acknowledge Assemblywoman Nancy Pinkett. It's a pleasure to meet you earlier. Thank you for joining us on this occasion. Not too long, but in this moment, as we reflect on the precious legacy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who had an amazing impact throughout her lifetime and set an example of a committed life. And as I reflect on her legacy, the question I ask myself is, what am I carrying? I may just have to. As I reflect on her legacy, I ask myself, what am I carrying as I climb? Right? What am I carrying as I climb? As we look at her life, spending time in Rutgers, law school, and what she faced, how she was not paid like the male professors, right? She was one of 20 women professors across the country, not treated properly. Also, as she moved forward in her career, she attempted to get a position with the Supreme Court Justice as a clerk. She was denied because she was a woman. And continuously as she moved forward, she did not forget those injustices she faced. By starting the Women's Rights Project at ACLU in her first year, arguing over 300 cases that changed the trajectory of women's rights in our country. She argued 6 Supreme Court cases during that time and won 5 of them. Unprecedented. Also, she filed the first federal case for a 28-year-old black woman who faced involuntary sterilization in North Carolina. The first federal case, Ruth Ginsburg filed that. And as she moved up the Supreme Court, we saw that same legacy as she looked out for rights of those that were the most vulnerable, voting in not only concurring opinions, but writing some of the amazing legal writing I've ever seen. When I went to law school, specifically, there was a case I remember, Shelby v. Holder. You know that case.
Wow.
Right? I know that case because I'm from South Carolina, and I know the history of those that fought very hard to get that Voting Rights Act instilled. And as you read her dissent, I'll never forget, in class we had a discussion. I was down. I was sad. But when I read that dissent, it reminded me of the hope. In that dissent, she talked about what Congress had the power to restore.
That's right.
And what did she mean by that? That we, the people, had the power to do what is right with restoring the right to vote to people across this country and protecting the right to vote. So she gave us a charge that even though this court opinion is coming down, we have to fight for the protections so that everybody that is a citizen in this country, people that are not only formally incarcerated can vote. And even though we have in this country now that people incarcerated or cannot vote, she's encouraging us that everybody should have the right to vote in this country. Everybody should have the right to vote in this country. Everybody should have a say in the democracy. It should not just be a particular group, it should be everybody. And that right should be protected. And she also talked about Selma. She lifted up Selma, she lifted up the bridge. She lifted up Dr. King, she lifted up all the foot soldiers who marched across that big 600 people. Children marched across that bridge. And I had the opportunity to go across the Evan Pettus Bridge with my colleagues from the Institute for Social Justice this past February, and I thought about that moment. That giant moment, crossing that bridge, which would have a pivotal role in the Voting Rights Act. And then today in New Jersey, and today as we face a vital election, we have to show up to the polls, not only on November 3rd, but we have to show up every single day, fighting for the rights of the most vulnerable. to ask ourselves, and even in this moment, we look at the voting rights history we witnessed. Right in March 2020, after the 1844 No More campaign that the Institute worked on with our partners, restoring the right to vote to 83,000 people on probation and parole. We witnessed history. We were a part of history. People that were denied the right for over 176 years from the 1844 Constitution in New Jersey. So the question for us is, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she lived her life climbing and carrying. What are we going to carry as we climb? What communities are we going to remember when we are in these meetings, when we're advocating? We have to continue to fight on, right? Even in her old age, she was still on the court holding on, standing for the most vulnerable because she knows she had a duty to do such, right? So there's no sitting down, no sitting out. We have to be involved, and we have to double down on democracy. This election, and every day, not just November 3rd, November 4th, November 5th. Every single day, we need to be involved in our communities and to carry on the precious legacy of those that have come before us to get us here in this moment. So I just wanted to share those words with you. I want to thank everybody putting this event on. It's a powerful event, and I hope we continue to carry on this legacy as we reflect and we apply what she set for us. We apply it in our lives every single day.
My name is Cookie Rivera, and today, right now, I'm representing the Latino Action Network of New Jersey. And what I need, thank you, we're working very hard. But I want to mention three things that's very important to this election. Number one, this election is not on November 3rd. This election started when the mail-in ballots came to your addresses and when they started to be submitted into the mail ballots. So we are already voting. So it's important to know what we're voting for and make sure that we vote. Number two, the ballot question on the ballot, question number 3 about redistricting. It always, for the general public, makes an explanation that's very hard for someone to understand. Basically what it means that because of the delay of the census and the extensions of the census, that it's saying that if the data is not collected and completed by December 31st, that when they draw the state lines and congressional lines in New Jersey, that they would use the data from 10 years ago. This is absolutely unacceptable with the population increases of our communities throughout New Jersey, number one. Number two, this census has surpassed all the numbers from the last 3 sentences in a row. So we have a lot more population that's represented, and we have to use that. That would be a permanent decision. That's no on number 3. It's no on number 3. And I'll be a little done with it. How many of you have ever heard the word redistricting commission? You have no idea in the general public how many people don't know what that is. And to close that off, it's New Jersey and Virginia are the only 2 states in the country that not only draw congressional lines, but they also draw state legislative lines. This could not be more important to us and our communities. Lastly, what I will say is that there are 2 bills that prohibit police intimidation at the polls. And we ask that every person, please call your legislators to support A4655. Verlina Reynolds Jackson is the sponsor of that bill. Prohibits police intimidation at the polls. And Senator with sponsors Assemblyman Wimberly. And Senator Sheila Turner is Senate Bill 2923. This information will be on our Facebook listservs of the NAACP, of the Latino Action Network, and many, many more. If you need anything, please just contact us. We're very easy to find. God bless you, and thank you for listening. And it's what on number 3? No. Thank you.
Next, I want to welcome up Lori Sokol, Executive Director of eWomen's News. Give her a big welcome as she comes.
and girls around the world, everything from sex trafficking to child marriage to FGM to violence against women. This is our 20th year that we are doing so, and it's a pleasure to be here. Okay, so as you can see from my hat, I am representing what community? Come on. LGBTQ community. Okay, I'm going to try to hold on to it because it's going to blow off, you know, it's just... but it doesn't stop at the hat, and I'm going to put the hat down right now. Because look at the shirt that I'm wearing. What does it say?
My son came out and then so did I.
Someone say it. First my son came out, and so did I. It's a shirt I wear every year at the Pride Parade in New York, although this year, of course, I couldn't march. But I had it printed 10 years ago when I came out, after my son did. I grew up, I was a teenager in the 70s, right? We won't talk about what our age is. No. And I knew if I came out in the 70s, my parents, particularly my mother, would disown me. So I made sure when I had children, and particularly a son, who I believed was gay from the age of 4 or 5, it was obvious, I made sure that he did not grow up in a home where he could not be his authentic self. So he came out at the age of 19, and going to Vassar didn't hurt, because we know Vassar, right? Exactly. So we need to look at one generation to the next. And the fact that my son felt free, safe, and comfortable to come out where I didn't. I was 49 when I came out, he was 19. And the point is, we owe a lot of this to RBG, right? When it came to legal recognition of queer lives, same-sex marriage equality, the decriminalization of homosexuality, and protections in employment. Ginsburg joined the majority for every decision for LGBTQ rights from the Supreme Court. In fact, she was the first Supreme Court justice to marry an LGBT couple, which is very important. I can only imagine the courage it took for a woman from that decade, right? She was born in 1933, to grow up, to take these issues on. It's also very personal for me because my mother, who's the complete opposite from RBG, grew up within a mile of where RBG grew up. Also in Brooklyn, New York, also a Jewish middle-class family, right? They went to the same high school, J. Madison High School in Midwood, Brooklyn, and graduated the same year. I only found this out about 6 months ago. Here, I thought after 60 years of knowing my mother, I heard every single detail about her life, but there it was. In her high school yearbook, she showed me, she pointed to a picture of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in her yearbook. So just imagine the courage it took for this woman at that time to pursue the future that she envisioned for herself in comparison to most women like my mother, who chose the safer, more traditional role of wife and mother, right? And was married to an abusive man, my father, for over 60 years. Okay? She internalized the misogyny, whereas Ruth Bader Ginsburg did the opposite. So, what did I do the night I learned that RBG passed away? I cried, like many of us did. But then I immersed myself in the next week, over the next 7 days, about what it must have been like to be her. They were both born in 1933. A 17-year-old graduating from high school to pursue the career that she did and defy the norms set for women at the time. So being a journalist, what did I do? I wrote about it, right? And I wrote an article which was published just a week later in Women's E-News, because I know the editor-in-chief personally. She's me. And I wrote an article comparing the two, and I entitled it, My Mother and RBG, the Class of 1950. And it goes like this. They were both born in 1933, less than 2 months apart. They both grew up in Brooklyn, New York, no more than 1 mile away from each other. And they were both in the same graduating class at James Madison High School in 1950. I first learned that Ruth Bader Ginsburg and my mother shared the same alma mater and graduation year only 5 months ago. Just when I thought I couldn't learn anything new about my mother's life in the 60 years I've known her, I was shocked, really, that she had omitted this one fascinating detail. But there she was, as my mother pointed to a blurry black and white photo of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, also nicknamed Kiki at the time, a member of the graduating class in our high school graduation yearbook. Since I initially wrote off this discovery as not much more than a novel piece of trivia to share with other family members at a future gathering, I had barely thought about it since. That is, until Friday, September 18th. When RBG died that day, and for the next day, and the day after that, I read, watched, and listened to tribute after tribute, gripping the airwaves and social media outlets, honoring his don't go anywhere, legacy. I'm on this. Not in the middle of my article. I then began to consider the daunting amount of courage it must have taken to embark on her own career, let alone one in the extremely male-dominated field of law. If RBG did, this is nothing, a little bit of wind, that's all this is. Particularly at that time, it was glaring, in fact, since I viewed my mother as quite the opposite, choosing the much more sheltered, safe, and secure role of housewife and mother, even though she longed to be on the stage as a singer and actress, in addition to having a family. I found it fascinating comparing the two. Now 70 years later, my mother is still alive, by the way, about the choices each of them had made, one taking the traditional and familiar path, while the other took the more risky road less traveled. I therefore spent the last 7 days going back 7 decades, rummaging through old photos, letters, and newspaper clippings, attempting to immerse myself in a time 10 years before I was even born. What must it have been like to be a teenager in America then, and in Brooklyn in particular, for a 17-year-old girl contemplating her future post-high school graduation? I felt inspired by RBG's choice, but disappointed by my mother's. I learned that Brooklyn provided the ideal depiction of Americanism at that time, a melting pot of recently arrived immigrants. The newsstands reflected that diversity, where in addition to the New York Times and the Daily News, other newspapers were published in a myriad of languages, among them the Italian Progresso, the Yiddish Forward, the Irish Echo in Gaelic, and many others. Yet for many, diversity was far more limiting than it was accepting. Public racism was rampant. Laws existed prohibiting interracial marriage. And it wasn't until just 3 years earlier, in 1947, that Jackie Robinson became the first African-American player in the major leagues. For women, there were very strict gender roles, which mainly consisted of preparing meals, doing the dishes and laundry, and taking care of the children, all while being the ideal wife. They were continually cautioned to keep an attractive appearance for their husband and keep them happy to prevent him from leaving. These gender roles became even more prominent following the end of World War II, which ushered in a new age of prosperity where men would be the sole provider, contributing to their feelings of male superiority. The labor force was comprised of a staggering male-to-female ratio of 5 to 2, and wives were responsible for their husbands' professional careers. It's no wonder that television shows like Father Knows Best, raise your hand if you remember Father Knows Best, right? Which portrayed rigid gender roles for women and men, was so popular. Essentially, marriage was the main goal for girls, and family life was their major aspiration and the manifestation of a perfect existence. For RBG, viewing the imperfections of this existence may be what led her to envision an alternate future for herself, along with a little help from her mom. In quotes, "My mother told me to be a lady, and for her that meant be your own person, be independent," Ginsburg often recounted. She also anticipated the challenges she would face as a young woman planning to attend law school at that time. "The study of law was unusual for women of my generation," she once said. For most girls growing up in the 40s, the most important degree was not your BA, but your MRS. Still, she did not allow any of those challenges to stop her. She understood exactly what kind of change she wanted to make and be in the world because she had experienced it so personally. Yes, RBG was a radical, in essence, just by being herself. Believing that a gender line helps to keep women not on a pedestal, but in a cage, RBG spoke about the importance of fathers' involvement in lessening the load on mothers. In quotes, "Women will not have achieved full equality until men share the responsibility of bringing up the next generation." And we still are not there yet. She also made it clear to her male colleagues on the court when they appeared indifferent about a girl's strip search by school administrators that they would have responded differently had they been a 13-year-old girl. In quotes, "Every woman of my vintage knows what sexual harassment is, although we didn't have a name for it," she said. So clearly for women like my mother, who earned the degree of MRS instead of ESQ, MD, or PhD, RBG knew of the importance of speaking, defending, and supporting them as well. In quotes, she once said, "One lives not just for oneself, but one's community," when responding to a question about her legacy, the importance of living for your community. So, just as Kate McKinnon once coined in her hilarious impersonation of RBG on SNL, by ending with the line, "You've been Ginsburned," okay, I would like to say, in RBG's honor, yes, RBG, I have been Ginsburned, and both I and my mother thank you for it. This morning, I learned yet another lesson from RBG. And that's the point. We need to learn lessons from RBG every day and in every experience we have, because she exists in all of that. So in honor of this vigil and knowing I'd be coming here, I wanted to wear a particular kind of mask, like you're wearing the vote in, rainbow colors and vote. But I couldn't find one. What I did find was this. And when I first looked at it, I said, oh, no. That reminds me of white supremacy and how Trump and his supporters are wrapping themselves in the flag, right? But then I thought again, and I thought about RBG and what would she say? And what she would say is, this is not who a flag represents. It represents the brown and black and rainbow colors of America. And we should continue to wear the flag and embrace the flag because that is who we are, not the white supremacists who are using the flag to continue their privilege and hatred and discrimination against people of color, women, the LGBT community. The list goes on and on and on. So, I guess you could say this morning again, I was Ginsburned, right? And I hope that all of you at the end of this vigil will be Ginsburned as well, because I hope, as I'm sure you all do, that her passing spark a revolution. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Shante Narav, the Middlesex County Freeholder. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. So they asked me to speak loudly, and they don't, obviously, everybody doesn't know me. I always speak loudly. So I stand here very honored to be at this vigil because I stand here as a woman of color who's a naturalized citizen and who's an attorney and who's actually a lifelong public defender. And I know many of those things would not have been possible without Ruth Bader Ginsburg having walked on this planet and all of the things she did even prior to her ascending to the Supreme Court. So she's always been a role model for me, and I'll throw out, because our last speaker talked about one of the things she said, that we have to have men, they are lifting up the women and being true partners, and I'll just throw out Marty Ginsburg was my tax attorney, my tax professor in law school, and he was like the definition of the word mensch. I stand here knowing that Aaron spoke to some of the things I was going to talk about, especially when he talked about Shelby v. Holder, because as an attorney, I've got to talk about some of the cases. And so Aaron talked about it, but I don't know how many of you know the background of that particular case. So Shelby County brought a case in federal court, and it got all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the reason they brought that case is there was a little town in Shelby County, and they changed their voting rules. And the outcome of that change meant that the only African American who sat on the council, the town council, who'd ever sat on the town council, was voted out. And the changes they made were in direct opposition to what the Voting Rights Act of 1965 stood for. Everything that Dr. King and everyone else fought for was, you can't give people the right to vote and then constantly undermine their ability to exercise that right. So the Voting Rights Act was designed to keep people from disenfranchising our brothers and sisters, right? So here's Shelby County, and what the law said as part of the Voting Rights Act is you can't make changes that would affect someone's right to vote without having that pre-certified, pre-approved. Shelby County, they didn't make this little town go through any process. Not that Shelby County makes the decisions, that comes all the way up to the Voting Rights Commission or federal court. So that case wound up in our modern Supreme Court, and our modern court gutted the Voting Rights Act, with our current Chief Justice saying, you know, and I'm going to paraphrase because I only quote people I truly, truly admire, and I'm still waiting for John Roberts to recognize his role, so he doesn't get direct quotes from me. But John Roberts basically said, you know what? We kind of kicked that discrimination problem, right? We don't have these issues, so what do we need to have all these complicated rules that are screwing things up? That was like sum and substance of his majority opinion. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent can be described in one word, to me: prescient. Because she, in her dissent, predicted exactly where we are today. So where we are today is people are being disenfranchised left and right. People who have paid their dues, and I think I told you all I'm a public defender. So I believe in the power of redemption. And I also understand that many of those people who are being forced to redeem themselves shouldn't have had to. But because we have systematic racism everywhere, and especially in our court systems, they have to constantly justify their continued existence in our communities and be denied rights that everybody else has. But we are now in a system where people who have paid their dues still can't be treated equally. And we can see what's happening in Florida. They passed a law to allow people who have paid their dues, people who have been incarcerated, to now get their voting rights back. And what do in Florida? They say, oh, wait, pay all your court fines first. Well, let me tell you, in Florida, good luck to you to figure out how much you owe and where you gotta go pay it, and how you have to pay it, what forms of payment they'll take. So we are doing that to the people who have been formerly incarcerated. And now we are doing things like taking away voting stations all over the country so that people who live in poor and underserved communities, and in this country, those are predominantly people of color, no longer can just walk down the street or take a bus or even drive a short distance to vote. Some of them, there are places in this country where there are jurisdictions making people drive up to an hour or more to go vote. That is ridiculous. There is no other reason you would do that but to prevent them from exercising their rights as citizens. There are schemes going on where many of you may or may not know this, but on many of the reservations, the way those reservations are built, people don't have house numbers. So there are jurisdictions that say, you don't have a house number, well, how can we register you to vote? So there's been something that's been going on with a group of advocates and Google Maps, and they have been Google mapping reservations so that they can help people get registered. But why the hell do they have to go do that? This is all because of the decision in Shelby v. Holder. This is because people in power and people out of it, but who think that who they are, the color of their skin, how much they have in their bank accounts, where they work, where they live, mean they are better than others. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg saw it for what it was. She knew this was going to happen. And let me tell you something. Erin referred to it. She said that the power lies within us. Well, let me tell you, it wasn't just in Shelby v. Holder. People who've ever had the privilege of hearing her speak when she'd gone out, she would always talk about the fact that people in this country should not wait for the Supreme Court to make decisions that so fundamentally affect our lives. She would always remind people about our system of government and the fact that there is the power of the legislature to create laws. And those legislators only get in power if we put them in power. And we, as my mother says, we bring a lot on ourselves, people. So when I hear people complaining, right, and my friend Yvonne mentioned it, when I hear people complaining and then I find out they didn't vote, or worse, I find out they're not registered to vote, I'm very real. So I start to either get angry or want to throw up in my mouth. Because it's people like that that are screwing it for the rest of us, right? People who think, oh, my vote doesn't matter, I get upset with them. I said, yes, it doesn't matter because you're not allowing yourselves to be counted. Yes, you have made your vote not matter by not exercising it. So all of you all, I'm preaching to the choir, right? And New Jersey is coming out in droves. I'm going to say to you all, right, the ones who are part of that choir, I feel like we have extra responsibilities. Our responsibilities is to make sure everybody you know votes. Our responsibility is to help our brothers and sisters in states where they are systematically suppressing votes. Those are our responsibilities. Close by is Pennsylvania. We don't have to go too far. There are places in New York. When I was a young legal aid lawyer, I lived most of my times in New York, and I was a legal poll watcher where they always put me in Harlem. Why? Because you could go to other parts of New York City. You could be in Soho. You could be in Greenwich Village, right? You would not see, I'm a Democrat, you would not see Republican legal poll watchers in those sites. But where were they? I can remember being there one year. It was Hillary's first run for Senate, and it was me and 5 white dudes in really expensive suits. Because they were trying to make sure that every person of color who was coming in there was going to have a tough time voting. Right? This happens everywhere, but there are certain states that are crucial, right? Where I have my own personal agenda, I know who I want to have win, but let me tell you this. I am a naturalized citizen. There is nothing more important to me than the fact that I became an American at the age of 18. My parents brought me here, but I still had a choice. At the age of 18, I applied to be a citizen in this beautiful country. And I bless the fact that I have my right to vote, and I exercise it. And I want everybody to exercise it. I would hope that people exercise it in a way that uplifts, but everybody needs to exercise their right to vote. So I'm going to tell you all, you all need to vote for everybody who can't, for the people in the states that have not restored their voting rights, for people in states where there are immigrants who are still waiting, some of them 20 plus years, to become citizens, for the kids who are losing SNAP, who are losing benefits, for the LGBTQ, we talked about that. Well, let me tell you something that happened Monday. The Supreme Court decided not to hear Kim Davis's case. Now, Kim Davis is the clerk who didn't want to have to authorize marriages if they weren't between heterosexual couples. So the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to hear your case, which in a way you say, hello. That means a lower court case that said she was wrong stands. But see, 2 of the justices, they wrote dissents. And those dissents were frightening. When you read their rationale for why our brothers and sisters who happen to not love in the way that they think people should love, why those people are not deserving of the same rights as any of the rest of us. It is frightening. And not voting means that if you care about your LGBTQ brothers and sisters, not voting means you are allowing them to suffer. Not voting means that people who serve time, you don't care about redemption. Not voting means redlining will continue in all the places that we know it still continues. There are so many things that'll happen if we don't vote. So I'm going to say to you, Ruth Bader Ginsburg would say to every single one of you, stop relying on me to fix all your problems, right? I can only do so much from where I am, and it's on all of the rest of us to do our part. So thank you all for asking me to come. Thank you all for being out here, and vote, vote, vote. Sorry. Last thing, and you'll all be amazed that I forgot this, but the big dude standing back over there is not only my fellow Middlesex County freeholder, the deputy director of our Middlesex County Freeholder Board, but imagine it, he's my little brother.
We welcome Kenny Armwood to be here. We're so thankful for you to be among us and present. Thank you. So, COVID has all been about adaptation and innovation, sometimes willingly and sometimes not so willingly. With the wind out today, we can be thankful that the rain has stopped, but the Candlelight Vigil, probably not the right thing to be doing. So I want to ask you to do a couple of things. Can you make a flame with your hands? You can move your fingers so we know the strength of your flame.